hi to whoever clicked on this video. Now, I might be a little bit biased considering I grew up during my teenage years on Tumblr, and I do gravitate towards more long form written content, mostly deep dives on niche topics. But at this point, for multiple years, I've been having this feeling, almost intuition, if you will, that blogging and more specifically written long form content is going to make a comeback. I know it might sound like a bit of a stretch considering in a world of Instagram and TikTok, short form content is definitely thriving. But I've been noticing some cultural shifts and also different online trends, which make me think that blogging is in fact going to make a comeback. So hear me out. I'm going to get into a lot of topics today, but before we begin, all my sources are going to be in the description below. And as you can probably tell by the setup, the lack thereof of lighting and stuff, this is my first time YouTube video, so please be kind to me. Yeah, I'm still figuring stuff out, and let's get into it. First things first, what even is a blog? If we're going by the dictionary, a blog is essentially a website or a web page that is created by an individual or a small group of people, which is regularly updated and mostly written in more of an informal style. In a way, depending on the topic, it's the equivalent of a digital journal or diary. Generally speaking, a blog is a place for personal expression on literally any topic at all. It could be about food, about travel, fashion, politics. There are literally so many blogs in this world. So it's really hard to pin it down to just a few topics. The key element, however, is that it's supposed to be personal and reflect the tone and voice of the author. And naturally, the concept of blogging evolved over time. What started out as mostly just written content, not even really pictures, literally just text on websites, then evolved into video blogging or vlogging as we know it with the rise of YouTube. And while that's a really interesting topic on its own, for the sake of my argument today, I will only be focusing on written blogging and its role in our internet culture. So now on to the historical part of blogging. It is widely agreed upon that the very first blog was established in 1994 by Justin Hall. His website links.net operated like a digital diary where he shared opinions and thoughts on multiple topics and included links that led other people to different websites which he liked and found interesting, hence the name of the website. Though this was technically the very first blog, the term weblog wasn't introduced until 1997 and then in 1999 shortened to just blog. Around this time, new platforms and tools started to emerge, which allowed users to comment on each other's posts and interact with each other, and this played a pivotal role in basically establishing online communities. A huge milestone came in 2003 when Google purchased Blogger, which back then was a platform which allowed users to create and publish their own blogs without needing to have like a huge knowledge of coding and programming. Blogger also introduced the monetization through AdSense, which meant that finally bloggers were able to make money through their work. All of these changes and making it more accessible for the everyday person basically led blogs to explode in numbers. What started out as roughly only 50 blogs in 1999 skyrocketed to about 70 million blogs in the mid-2000s. By that point, blogging had really entered the mainstream. Considering the millions of blogs existing by this point in time, it's actually no surprise that blogs started to merge into different subgroups by this time. There were mommy bloggers, travel bloggers, tech bloggers, political bloggers. Also, please don't take a shot every time I say bloggers. Or actually do, I don't really mind. I mean, you do have free will after all. All of that to say, though, if we're talking influence, I like to argue that none of those bloggers had as much as a cultural impact as the fashion bloggers of the aughts and early 2010s, which actually coincides with the indie sleaze era that was happening at the time, which, put a pin in that, we're gonna get back to it later on. You see, blogging started out as a really text-heavy medium, but fashion bloggers in particular revolutionized the format by also incorporating more and more pictures into their posts to just really show off their personal style. And I really think that marked a turning point for blogging as a creative medium and also just really cemented its influence on internet culture, but also moved its influence into the real world. I want to dwell a bit more on the rise of fashion bloggers in the late 2000s and early 2010s because I really think they played a huge part in shaping blogging and also just internet culture as a whole. When I think about the early days of blogging, I'm immediately reminded of those everyday people who started out writing from their bedrooms and then somehow ended up sitting front row at the fashion week. Today, thanks to Instagram and TikTok, the regular person to D-list celebrity pipeline seems almost normal actually, but a good 15 years ago it was really groundbreaking. Everyday people like you and me were finally able to break into the fashion world without the need of having to work for high fashion magazines, which actually, if you think back of it, I mean, even now today, but back then especially, always came with having to have a certain privilege. In a way, these bloggers were amongst the earliest internet influencers by building a community with their audience, which traditional media just couldn't replicate. We definitely had some OGs, which are still present now. I'm definitely gonna butcher those names, so apologies in advance. But yeah, people who come to mind are Chiara Ferrani and Leandra Medine Cohen, aka Man Repeller. This growing interest inspired even more networks, specifically designed to cater to the visual aspect of fashion blogging to emerge. A huge one was lookbook.nu, which launched in 2007. Bloggers could upload pictures of their outfits and earn quote-unquote hype on them, which was basically just a voting system amongst its users. In a way, it became a catalyst for the rise of street style and was instrumental in popularizing the twee aesthetic and the general buzz around vintage fashion that resonated with the blogging scene at the time. As creators began to gain recognition and were able to provide shopping links to their one pieces, the website became increasingly more appealing to companies, resulting in the early stages of brand gifting. And honestly, if you really think about it, their influence didn't really stop at fashion either. I'd like to argue that the rise of fashion bloggers actually inspired traditional print magazines to go digital and also paved the way for countless online-only publications. So in a way, bloggers really defined how we consume media and sort of blurred the lines between personal and professional content. As the internet continued to evolve in the mid to late 2000s, multiple new platforms started to rise to popularity, especially social media ones. One of them, which sort of bridged the gap between traditional blogging and social media, was Tumblr. Yes, we're gonna go there. Tumblr was unique in that it combined the accessibility of social media with the creative freedom of traditional blogging. Users could easily personalize their pages, posting anything really from just typical written content to image galleries to audio clips and even videos. Looking back, I really think that Tumblr was partly responsible for transforming the blogging world into more short form content that happened later on, like Twitter and Pinterest. I actually read the book Blogging by Jill Walker Rettberg, who is the professor of digital culture at the University of Bergen, and she labels this trend as microblogging. Taking Twitter as an example, she basically argues that people now started to post more short form updates instead of full fledged blog posts, which brings us to the next part of the video. By the mid 2010s, most online users started to join platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Suddenly, everyone seemed to be a blogger slash influencer, or at least had the means to do so. The new ability to share updates in more short form content in real time with your friends and followers, blogs started to feel really outdated. And even online magazines started to mimic social media by this point, posting more shorter content on a near regular level. This shift meant that audiences didn't really have to wait anymore for longer, thoughtful blog posts because by this point, instant updates simply became the norm. At the same time, our attention spans were shrinking also. Studies have shown that the average person's ability to focus has been declining steadily over the past few years. Instead of long form written content, people started to gravitate more towards image and videos on Instagram and YouTube. That doesn't mean that blogs started to disappear entirely, however, but by this point, blogs were consumed by definitely more niche and smaller audiences than before. I mean, rarely have we seen new bloggers really blow up in the past 10 years or so. On the contrary, influencers, for example, on TikTok and on Instagram, are basically everywhere now. Okay, now onto my favorite part of this video. Is blogging making a comeback? Let me just say this much. Recently, I've been seeing a lot of online and societal trends, which do make me believe that we are long overdue for a resurgence of blogging. Let me explain. One of the biggest drivers between a potential blogging revival is actually our nostalgia for the earlier internet, for simpler and less algorithm-driven times. And this craving for a messier and more individualistic internet actually ties in perfectly for the indie sleaze revival, which has been dominating not only fashion and music, but also just digital aesthetics for the past, I want to say, 2 to 3 years at this point. And if you really think about it, in many ways, blogging was at the heart of the indie sleaze era. I think the indie sleaze trend really reflects our desire to reclaim authenticity and creativity in online spaces. And with how popular it's been these past few years, bringing back blogs actually just seems, to me at least, like a natural extension of the trend. Because unlike current social media platforms, I feel like blogs really embody the uncurated and more creative side of the early internet. Looking back on the past, I actually think that nostalgia has always played a huge role in the establishment of trends, especially but not only limited to fashion. Because these days, the internet's huge data pool actually makes it so much easier and more accessible for people to look up information and old pictures of previous decades and kind of get inspired by it and form new aesthetics surrounding it. Nostalgia is actually a really interesting topic because we've seen it play out in so many ways, whether it's the resurgence of disposable cameras or record players, or also if you think back to lockdown and post COVID, the boom of nostalgia based podcasts that were happening at the time. But why do we really gravitate towards the past, especially in certain periods? According to psychologist Christine Baccio, nostalgia tends to surface during times of uncertainty because it leaves us with a feeling of comfort and stability. On the Speaking of Psychology podcast, Baccio differentiates between personal and historical nostalgia. Personal nostalgia describes longing for memories we've actively lived through, while historical nostalgia reflects an idealized version of the past we may not even have directly experienced. In the case of the blogging era and the early internet, many of us were active members, but either voluntarily or involuntarily choose to remember those days through rose colored glasses. The majority of Gen Z, however, was simply too young to truly participate in those early online trends. Therefore, it's really no surprise that in times of dissatisfaction with the present, their impression of the good old internet days is shaped by curated anecdotes and visuals.
So if people are unhappy for any reason with how things are today, they're more likely then to experience this sense that things must have been better in the past. And how far they have to go in terms of their longing can depend upon how much they know about history. Some of this gets handed down through stories from grandparents, and some of it gets handed down through films that people watch or even literature that they've read. So someone could, for example, become enamored of a period in history, such as the Victorian days, not because they've lived through them, obviously, but because they have become romanticized and idealized in a way in literature and in film. Our memories are not faithful, they're not accurate to what things really were like. They're our impressions of what things were like in the past.
And let me just tell you, times are definitely uncertain right now, which, I mean, honestly, let's just really face it. Our generation is facing a lot of challenges at the moment. From political instability and a diabolical job market to basically unpayable rents and the ever-looming fear of war, we've definitely seen better times. On top of that, distrust in traditional media is basically at an all-time high, as seen with the horrible reporting on topics like Palestine and also, most recently, the Luigi Mangione case. People are increasingly turning towards more independent journalism and first-hand accounts to listen to perspectives they feel they can trust. Therefore, I can definitely see both political and news-driven blogs, as well as more light-hearted escapism type of blogs making a return. Nostalgia pretty much makes us romanticize a time which felt simpler and safer, and in turn makes us attempt to regain a sense of control in a future which seems really unsteady. And in a way, if we really think about it, blogging aligns perfectly with the way of yearning for the past. On top of that, right now the internet is full of discussions about our generation's social media fatigue. And honestly, it's no surprise whatsoever. Many of us spend hours glued to our phones, scrolling for hours on autopilot on some random feeds. Studies have shown that the average screen time has risen dramatically, with a lot of people spending 7 to 8 hours on their phone, most of it on social media. And obviously, this constant consumption can be super draining for us. I did a little bit of extra digging to find out what exactly it is that people are missing about the good old blogging days. And for that research, I went to the place of all evil. I went on Reddit. The common census on the Reddit forums that I was scrolling seemed to be that in today's world, it basically just feels like we're being 24/7 advertised to, which I can totally see. I mean, be it just influencers on social media, but also fashion magazines nowadays seem like there's just way more advertisement in it than it was like 10 years ago, I want to say. Combine that with the potential of the US TikTok ban, which, side note, I'm still not entirely sure if it's happening. I think it is, but I guess we have to wait and see. And yeah, just the natural cycle of social media apps. Twitter's decline being a prime example right now. And I do feel like we're on the brink of like a major shift approaching right now. From what I can tell, people are gravitating more towards long form content again. Written yet, I'm not sure, but definitely on YouTube. I do see a lot of long form, deep dive content being back again. And I think it ties in back into the current societal trend of just having a more slow life and maybe a bit more offline, even. I don't know if it makes sense. But yeah, I think that people are craving a more offline life again. And while we're on the topic of long form content, if you've been keeping up with digital trends lately, I'm sure you've heard of Substack before. It's essentially a newsletter and blogging platform which allows creators to monetize their content directly through subscriptions. I think what's interesting about it is that Substack kind of taps into the core of what was blogging back in the early days. Its appeal is basically its independence, its creative control, and also the ability to have a more intimate relationship with its readers. I mean, in a way, it's really become a hub for independent journalists, writers, and yeah, just content creators. But it's also not just Substack that signals a shift towards more deep and intentional content consumption. Because if you really think about it, reading has become trendy as well again. And yeah, I know that technically reading has never really gotten out of style, but I feel like with the popularity of book talk and stuff, there has really been an undeniable newfound love for literature lately. Now, is this current hype for reading slightly performative, maybe? I think it's a topic for another day. Um, but most recently, I've actually seen a really interesting video by I think she's called Charlie Chats. I'll link the video down below. But yeah, she was basically talking about books and just reading in general kind of becoming like a status symbol lately. And yeah, again, I think it was really interesting. So I do recommend you watch it as well. Now, all of these topics aside, though, I do think that the trends I've mentioned kind of signal our society moving into a new direction of content consumption. And as exciting as the idea of a blogging resurgence might be, and trust me, it really is to me, um, I do think it's only fair to also look at the challenges which might stand in its way. I'd say that one of the biggest obstacles of a blogging resurgence is our attention span, or rather the lack thereof, to be honest. With the rise of platforms like TikTok, where the average length of a video is about a minute, if we even make it to the end of the video, to be honest, before we start scrolling to the next one, we definitely struggle to hold our attention on long form content, to put it mildly. Blogging demands a lot of time, both from its writer and from its reader. And in a world that thrives on instant gratification, it can be hard for us to slow down and really take our time consuming content. I think another struggle is just the sheer saturation of influencers across digital platforms. I mean, if every person is basically an influencer, how much influence does one have really? If someone blows up in today's world, I think that person simply does not have the same universal impact as someone that did so 10 or 15 years ago, because there are simply too many social media celebrities right now. And also, everyone is just kind of stuck in their own bubble and algorithm. So, yeah, the illusion of like a universal influencer simply is not the same. Additionally, changes in the Google algorithm practices and the prioritization of paid ads over organic search use make it harder for bloggers these days to gain visibility. And also, let's not forget, even though blogs have been around for such a long time, the monetization still remains a huge issue for blogs. While platforms like Substack offer solutions for that, um, traditional bloggers still struggle to make an income and, yeah, especially just make a living off of their work, especially in a world where content is expected to be free. Okay, I know that the last part kind of seemed to have ended in a bit of a pessimistic note, but let's not get it twisted. After all, I wouldn't have made a video if I did not heavily believe in a possible comeback. While I'll admit that blogging will probably never reach the same heights as it did back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, I do think that we are in for a major shift, whether it's through platforms like Substack or just creating standalone websites. I do see a lot of people distancing themselves from the common social media places and essentially creating their own spaces, which I will say I could definitely see this becoming beneficial for our mental health. In terms of topics and niches for blogs, I'm pretty certain that our political climate right now is going to have a major influence. With a growing distrust in traditional media, the rise of independent journalism blogs like they in parts already exist seems like the natural next step to me. Obviously, there's no way of knowing for sure, but as I said before, I've been having this like really growing intuition that our online presence is about to change. And honestly, I think that's really exciting. I think it's really fun to kind of theorize about different possibilities we could go into. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it as well. After years of what felt like just essentially brainless content consumption, I think we're long overdue for a change. Anyways, that's it from me. If you made it to this part or even just clicked on the video in the first place, thank you so much, really. And yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. As I said, all the sources are linked in the description below. And yeah, see you soon. Bye.